television.
Brought to you by Vatika Black Shine Shampoo. सुंदर नहीं रहूं टुक्का भाई जीव. Dabur Special Light Hair Oil. Make हर एक दिन special. Namaste and hearty welcome to yet another brand new episode of Life is Beautiful. As usual, I always promise you to bring a promising people in Life is Beautiful, and today we have Georgina Beyer, who is the world's first transsexual member of the Parliament. Welcome to my show, Life is Beautiful.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here.
So you were considered as famous as Sir Edmund Hillary back in New Zealand. So what is the connection between you and Edmund Hillary?
Well, the connection on this particular journey is that as a fellow New Zealander, I am helping to conquer social mountains here. He conquered Everest, of course. Couldn't have been done without Tenzing, though, because Tenzing knew the way to get there. And I'm here to support LGBT human rights to be included in your constitution since they're writing it. It's a very exciting time in your country's history, and I'm very privileged to take a part in it.
Okay, I would definitely like to talk about that later, but before that, tell us about your early childhood when you were a little boy named George.
That's right, I certainly was. Well, life was okay until I got to about 7 or 8 years of age. And from earlier than that, I'd displayed behaviour that was considered effeminate, and my parents didn't seem to worry about it too much when I was very young, but as I got a little older, they thought that they should start to condition that out of me, and I couldn't understand why the sudden sort of change in their attitude. And it wasn't until really I got to high school, college, that I began to understand all the different sexualities. There were homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, but they never talked about transsexuality. And I never quite knew where I fitted in gender-wise until I became more informed about it.
When did you want to become a girl?
But I left home at 16 and I moved to another city in order to pursue a career as an actor. And while I was in that pursuit, I ended up working in a television program. I was still a guy. Then. I ended up playing a boyfriend of one of the core cast in the soap opera. And it was during this short period of time that I worked in television that I was taken to a drag show where there were all these transgender people looking beautiful. They had breasts. And I thought, it's possible, I can do this. And I made a decision for a very young person that perhaps was a little bit hasty if I was to look back on it now, but I decided at that point that I was going to pursue my lifelong desire to that point to be the woman I am.
Born as a boy in a rural area of New Zealand and adopting a name Georgina, you went to nightclubs. Tell us about, you might have come to be in contact with other gays and lesbians in the nightclub or in the streets. Tell us about that notorious life, black and white of that life.
It absolutely is a notorious life. And strange enough, and of course I came introduced to it through the sex industry, I guess, but there is, there's some very good entertainment venues where they have drag shows. But I have to say that in the sex industry, there's nothing particularly glamorous about it at all, in my view. However, those of us, and we were street workers, and of course we were the lowliest of the low, that was difficult because even in the hierarchy of prostitution, transgender were always the bottom of the rung, and usually the street workers. And I entered into that in about 1976, and I worked in that until about 1982. And somewhere in between that, I was had an awful situation where I was pack raped in Sydney, Australia by 4 men, and it did a lot of damage to my mental health at that time. I felt like a worthless human being. It almost drove me to suicide. However, I recovered from that with some support from friends, And of course, that's one of the most dangerous aspects of prostitution. However, I must admit that amongst us, we formed a strong bond between each other so that we could support each other, look out for each other, and keep each other secure. A shoulder to cry on, I think, when we're feeling bad and lonely and all of that sort of thing. So we, strength between us.
When and how did you begin to take interest in local politics that made you the world's first transsexual mayor?
I have to admit that as soon as I discovered about transsexuals, I knew that's what I was. However, at school it was very difficult. It was hard because of ridicule, and people would give you a hard time, for being a little bit gay, a little bit queer. And so I guess I learned to suppress it, to avoid the ridicule. And that in itself is a sort of an abuse, really, that you tend to suffer because you suddenly realise that this isn't socially acceptable. But why? I mean no harm to anyone. This isn't my fault. It isn't a choice, of course, to be a transsexual or to be gay or lesbian. It is something that I believe naturally occurs, and therefore I found it very difficult to just assimilate into society, to get a job, to be normal as I wanted to be as a woman. Our social welfare department in New Zealand had institutional discrimination against people like us and told me when I went to apply for a benefit, go back and be the man you are. Put your trousers back on and be the man you're supposed to be. And I have to say that it was at that point I drew a line in the sand and I said, no, respect me for who I am and what I am. I mean you no harm. What is it to you that I am a transsexual? I want to be a positive contributor to our society, and I'm darned if I'm going to let anybody prevent me from doing that. Well, words are cheap, of course. It's easy to say that. But so I found myself unemployed and I was forced into the sex industry. But I have to say, I had a huge distaste for the sex industry. I hated it, never wanted to be part of it. And so my goal when I was in it was to get out of it. And that wasn't as easy as you might think. And after I recovered from that, I became very angry against society. I didn't believe anybody had a right to treat any human being, let alone myself, in that way. And that from that time forward, I was now going to prove to society that I am the worthy person I believe I am. And I re-entered the entertainment industry, actually, in film and television, and was successful. I must admit the roles that I played in the various programs and characters, etc., were usually ladies of the night or other transgender people, and they're wonderful characters, and you can look at that, but very limiting for a person who thought they might like a career in acting. And so by the end of the 1980s, I had decided that I'll cut loose from that, and I ended up going to a rural conservative area of my country, and a place called Carterton, and I worked in a community centre there, and I tutored on a drama course, and that was something new and different, and using the talents that I knew I had, and had obviously displayed. I'd been nominated for Best Actress in 1987 for a film role that I'd played, and that was very good acknowledgement as a woman. And so there I was in Carterton, and the next 10 years, longer than that, were going to be a remarkable experience.
So you were different from male and female. Being a transsexual from indigenous group or society, what difference have you found between the transsexual coming from indigenous group, one from general people?
I'm one myself. I am a native New Zealand Maori, and so I am from our ethnic group in New Zealand. And strangely enough, in many indigenous cultures, there has always been a place for people who are gender different, and it's a place of respect. I know even in some of the culture from your country, in some of the religions, Hindu and otherwise, is androgyny in some of your gods and things like that. But also, if you note, they have words to describe us. Now, language is ancient, and certainly in indigenous peoples, if there is a word or an explanation for people who may be transgender, for example, in Māori, a transgender person is called a whakawahine. Gay men and women are called takatapui. In the Pacific Islands, they are known as whawhawhine. So you see, when there is language that explains, then it gives an indication that third gender has been present in cultures for a long, long time.
You are fighting right now for the identity and you turned yourself from male to female. Why is that?
Because I had to, because that's who I am. These things aren't a matter of choice, in my opinion. It is something that just occurs naturally. No one is to blame, not parents, and I don't think upbringing necessarily. People naturally have this tendency that arises. Not for everyone, of course, but for some of us. So I stand as a role model now of a transgender person who has achieved well in the world of politics. First mayor who's been a transsexual ever elected in the world when I became a mayor in 1995 of the very town I moved to, Carterton. And then of course in 1999 I was approached by the New Zealand Labour Party, one of our major political parties, and asked to run as a candidate for them in the 1999 election. I was successful as well as my party, and we became government in 1999, which was very exciting. And it's not only transgender rights that I stand for the rights of all significant minorities. Yes, I have a particular expertise in the area of a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender and intersex. And just to carry on about, whether these things are chosen for you to be, intersex is a very interesting aspect because these are people who are born with the gonads of both sometimes in their own androgynes. They're born like that. Often, well, in Western culture at least anyhow, if there is a surgery is performed on babies not long after they're born to assign them to the more predominant sex, but often when they get to puberty, they might actually be opposite to what the surgeons decided at their birth. So that is really a very awful situation for intersex people to find themselves in when they've grown up. And of course they also get met with social exclusion sometimes. They are marginalised. So there is another aspect of sexuality. And I think one of the best things that we're able to do, that I might be able to do, is to help inform people for greater understanding. Because I have some sympathy for people who find it a bit strange. They can't help the cultures or the moral codes they've been brought up in. But I have to say that Judean Christian teachings should take a lot of responsibility for homophobia. Take the Catholic Church, for example. All the popes always speak out against homosexuality and things like that. And particularly in indigenous peoples who were colonised by Western cultures, and that's the case in New Zealand, some of the first people to arrive, of course, are missionaries to impose the Bible and Christianity upon the indigenous races and therefore the moral code that accompanies it. And they buy into it, of course. Māori are people of faith also. So, it's a very interesting and complex subject.
You became the world's first transsexual mayor in 1995 and you resigned in 2007. What is the reason?
Well, I resigned from Parliament in 2007, but yes, you're correct. In 1995, I was elected as Mayor of the Carterton District. I was re-elected in 1998 with a 90% majority, and then, of course, I was asked to run in the parliamentary elections of 1999, and by the year 2000, I realised I could not do both jobs, giving both jobs justice, and so I stood down from my mayoralty in the middle of the term, and 100% working as a Member of Parliament for the electorate of Wairarapa, which is where the town of Carterton is part of. Now, the electorate is huge and large and rural and conservative, so that in itself was remarkable that they were able to overlook my past or my sexuality. Mind you, I was quite famous, so they all knew all about it, and I entered Parliament and I entered public life in general with nothing secret. And I think that's an important point to make. If I had gone in and just hoped that no one would notice, it would have been awful because, the journalists, would find out and they would start to ask you the hard questions. So I believe the policy of honesty from the outset was the best thing. And also, I believe that people whom you are asking to vote for you deserve full disclosure of who this person is, because they're about to consider giving you their support to be their representative in the Parliament of the country. And I've always been known as being blatantly honest, very open, speaking my mind, sometimes too much, and with some criticism, but that's politics for you, isn't it?
You have already told us your black and white of life. Now tell me why life is beautiful to you.
Oh, life is beautiful because I believe that all people have the ability to fulfill their human potential. And that is an important matter because that means that if we are all citizens who are equal, then we can contribute to our societies, to make our world a little bit better and to feel that we are included. Life is beautiful because the world is beautiful. I know there's a lot of distress around the world, there's a lot of war and all of that, but we only need to look at our children. We only need to look at families to sort of see that the struggles are worth it. We live in a beautiful world, really. We're all suddenly realising that with the situation with climate change and that we're suddenly as human beings taking a much greater interest. Indeed, we must do. It's our responsibility to do so, to protect our world, the world that we love to live in, the world that makes life beautiful.
So, what is the purpose of your visit to Nepal when Nepal is, trying to reconstruct the constitution?
Well, last month I was in Copenhagen at the World Out Games Human Rights Conference, and sharing the panel with me in one of the major plenary sessions was Sunil Babu Pant, your first out gay Member of Parliament from Nepal. And I had met Sunil previously a few years ago in New Delhi at another LGBTI human rights forum that they were having there, when he was, of course, the leader of the BDS, the Blue Diamond Society. Well, in Copenhagen last month, he was impressed with my presentation and he said, I would love for you to come to Nepal. We're in the middle of rewriting our constitution. We've had some political difficulties in the recent past, but now we're trying to get it right. And he has a particular interest in the third gender being included in your constitution, allowing equal human rights for third gender. Now, it is my view that if Nepal does this, they would be the first country in the world to be inclusive of third gender anywhere that I can think of. And during my visit here, we have met with the President, with the Prime Minister, with the Speaker of the Parliament, with many of the party leaders. And at some of the programs that Sunil has been running since I have been here, I've only been here 5 days, I have heard nothing but positive encouragement toward considering this to be something that they should include into the Constitution. So I am here to share my experience, to give some advice, of what to perhaps watch out for when you're drafting such things, and also for people to have a face-to-face meeting with me, a person who has achieved world first in this situation, and as an example of how to do it, properly, and that, I believe I've been a worthy person because not only have I been a famous transsexual Member of Parliament and, in the world, but I was a damn good constituency MP. I got the hospitals for my area and the new roads and all the welfare things that needed to come in. So it's not as if I'm a one-issue person. And I think that's important for all politicians to never just be one-issue people, because our responsibility is for everyone in the country.
Legal process is clear, but the change through government has not been implemented. What do you want to say on that?
Well, of course, your Supreme Court gave a decision 2 years ago, and I would urge the government to follow up on those decisions to be inclusive of third gender. So that's one point. I also think that information imparted to people who are suspicious of all of this is highly important, to educate them, to desensitise the situation if they're feeling a little bit odd about it. But think about this. Think about people who aren't able to gain rights of citizenship because they are third gender. How are they meant to be able to travel overseas? How are they meant to be able to access all of the opportunities here in Nepal if they can't gain citizenship as the people that they are? And I mean, even to sort of, go for high degrees and things like that, you can't relegate, you shouldn't relegate people to being second-class citizens in your country. Why? Because they will become burdens on your society. And I think it's irresponsible of any government to relegate marginalised people to being second-class citizens. Why create a burden on your society? As I mentioned before, everyone should have a right to be positive contributors to their society, because that helps to make life beautiful.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm very much honored to have you on my show, and I'm very much enlightened. That was our today's guest for Beautiful People, who was born as a boy in rural New Zealand, Georgina Beyer, who battled drugs, the misery of sex work, and the prejudice to become the world's first transsexual mayor. I hope you had a wonderful time with her. For now, short break in Life is Beautiful. Come back to me for more. Brought to you by Vatika Black Shine Shampoo. Sundar nahi rahun thukka bhai jiu. Dabur Special Light Hair Oil. Make har ek din special.